Good morning, everyone. I hope you're off to a good start to your week. I started reading a book over the weekend and I cannot put it down. It's been a really interesting read, but there's something that really caught my attention reading this book that I wanted to talk about because I think it adds insight into the entire political and cultural zeitgeist that we're experiencing right now. But before I dive into it, I just want to give you context of like how I came about this book and where it came from. I think I'm working towards writing a book. It's kind of like accidentally coming into fruition, but I started realizing, well, I don't know when I started realizing this, but it's become clear to me that my understanding of the world has kind of been inverted. So I look at things, I think a lot of us do, from like a political context or a cultural context, and we don't really understand the root source of where these things come from. And so money has always been interesting to me because it's been, I think it's the one thing like we can all relate to, right? Like seems like there's never enough. There's always stress about it. And as I dove into like the money and the personal finance world, it dawned on me and it made me realize that the entire system of like what money is, how we access money, what credit is, how we invest, like all of that is predicated on an economic model that benefits some people and not others. And so we live in this like society where we keep score against one another through how we accrue wealth, and that wealth comes from our jobs. And all of that is about to disappear as AI starts taking people's jobs and we lose the ability to earn money and thus, flex and keep up with the Joneses and all that kind of stuff. And so it kind of made me start thinking like, what else is actually underpinning all of this? And so I started diving deeper into kind of economic theory and economic history and how we got here. Like the world we exist in today didn't just magically emerge from a vacuum, right? Like there is centuries, if not millennia, of precedent that has led us to this point. And so through studying economics more deeply from a historical perspective, I realized like economics is the foundation. So like whatever your economy is, that's the foundation. From that flows your politics, and then from that flows culture. So politics is downstream of economics, and culture is downstream of politics. So if you want to understand politics, you have to understand the economics. And if you want to understand the culture, you need to understand both politics and economics. And I studied political science, international relations, history in college, and I had one economics course, and it was like an intro econ 101 course. It like barely scratched the surface. I'm working on a side project right now that where I asked ChatGPT to create a history of modern economic thought for me. A course. So I've been slowly making progress through it. It's been a little slow, slower than I would have liked. But anyways, I've been going through economic theory. So I've been reading like Adam Smith, Thomas Malthus, David Ricardo, like all these different economic and political theorists that came up in the 18th, 19th, and then I'll continue on with 20th century. But I never learned any of this. I never learned any of this in college. I think, I learned about the World Trade Organization. I learned, obviously basics of like supply and demand, but I didn't understand the context of where these thoughts came from. And so with reading Adam Smith, I realized like capitalism came about as a result of the deterioration of feudalism. So feudalism deteriorated over time. Mercantilism was kind of the intermediary system that bridged the gap, and then capitalism emerged. And there was capitalism, the economy, or the economic system, and then there was capitalism, the political system. And they go hand in hand. But like when people talk about being anti-capitalist today, they don't understand that they're talking about kind of two different things. And like, yeah, there's the greedy corporation part of it, but then there's also private property and ownership. And that is like fundamental and unique to like America. Like from a historical perspective, people don't fundamentally understand that up until America started existing, like peasants in Europe didn't own anything. Like you didn't have land that was yours. And if you didn't have land that was yours, you couldn't take care of yourself. So there's no self-sufficiency. So you were always dependent on someone else for your survival. And so like we've seen in the 20th century with communism, how taken to the extreme, what happens when people are deprived of ownership of things and the ability to support themselves. Literally, and I'm not talking about like support yourselves, like be able to rent a nice apartment in Manhattan. I'm talking about like, do you have the tools, the land, the seeds, and the skills to grow food to survive? And like America was the first place where people could come here, own something, produce from it, and then if they generate a profit, great. But we kind of forget that when we talk about capitalism. So anyways, I've been studying the history of like economic thought, and so as I've done this and I'm looking at the context of what's happening in the economy today, I've like come across maybe an accidental book idea. But I'm really interested in how the United States began deindustrializing in the late 20th century and how that got us to where we're at today. And when I mean like where we're at today, you know, the rise of Trump and kind of populism in the United States. I've written a series about Gen Z's unemployment crisis, but Gen Z is one of the most indebted generations. Like they're not even fully in college yet. They haven't all graduated college yet. My friends and I from college were actually talking this weekend. My alma mater, I graduated in 2013, okay? I graduated in 2013. I think including rent or room and board and meal plans and all that stuff, the total cost of attendance when I was in school from 2009 to 2013 was like $60,000 a year. And the New York Times reported that my alma mater, as of this coming school year, is charging $92,000 a year. Like it's just, that's almost $500,000 if you pay fully out of pocket for a college degree. It's insane. Anyways, but so we have these problems where like millennials didn't get the jobs that we were supposed to get, and we've delayed like key life milestones like getting married and having kids and all that kind of stuff. Gen Z is coming up, like they don't have there's nothing for them. They're totally screwed. But in the interim, like I think the economy shifted over the last like 3-4 decades. And because it was happening during our lifetimes, I don't think anyone really understood it. And I'm one of these people, right? Like I am from a Rust Belt town in upstate New York. Like my father is a manufacturer. He works in heat treat in a factory. Like I had a front row seat to deindustrialization as it was happening. And I didn't even know it had happened until like maybe 5-6 years ago. Like I didn't quite really grasp what was happening. And so I'm trying to like learn like what happened. Like factory workers or like corporate management didn't just wake up in the 1980s and they're like, okay, we're going to ship over all of the jobs overseas now. Like that didn't happen in a vacuum. Like things fell into place to start taking jobs away. And when those jobs disappeared, that created a new political climate and a new culture. And I think what we're experiencing today in the United States in terms of polarization, we have all these irreconcilable differences and competing values. I think that is a byproduct of several decades worth of deindustrialization. So we've changed our economic system. We're no longer living in capitalism. Our political system may be capitalist in terms of like protecting private property, but economically, like we are no longer in a purely free market capitalist society. Like we are in some sort of like Keynesian managed economic system, where there's been some winners, a handful of winners, but a lot of losers. And that has translated into the politics, so the election of Donald Trump, populism, and that's reflected in the culture. So we're seeing a lot of anti-migrant sentiment right now, especially with illegal migrants. So all of this is connected to economics. So I'm trying to like, hopefully, I don't know, I think it'd be cool to write a book about kind of the history of deindustrialization, how we got here, what the current situation is now, and then obviously looking forward, we're seeing history repeat itself. Like okay, deindustrialization in the Rust Belt took blue collar jobs. Well, now AI is about to do the same thing to white collar folks. And because of the divergence in cultural and political beliefs, I think it's going to hit white collar folks in a way that they're not going to be able to handle because they've never experienced this before. They're totally like, they're above this. But then also, I don't blame them. I think people who have seen trade policies and economic policies take their jobs, close plants in the Midwest and the Rust Belt and the heartland of the country. I think people who lost their jobs and lost everything over the last couple decades are gonna look at white collar folks losing their jobs and they're not gonna bat an eye. Like, they were pretty much ignored. Like, the blue collar folks in, you know, places like Ohio and Detroit and Indiana were completely ignored. And their suffering was like, no one cared, right? No one stepped in, no one helped them. And so I think white collar folks have learned helplessness, and we're seeing this too with all this oppression narrative and like victimhood ideology. Like, folks who are white collar, living like cushy, comfortable lives, don't have skills, don't have real skills they need to survive in the world, and they're completely reliant on the government. And I think this is going to be a major flashpoint. I think there's several flashpoints that are coming up, but I think this is going to be one of them. I don't think there's going to be any sympathy at all for when cushy 9-to-5ers start losing their jobs and they have no idea how to survive, because there have been millions of people who have already been living this reality and no one cared. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into. So this book I started reading, it's called American Made: What Happens to People When Work Disappears by Farah Stockman. And what really piqued my interest about this book was in the beginning. I have highlights here. Let me pull it up. So in the beginning, the author, she's a woman from, I think she lives in Massachusetts. I don't know anything about her, Farah Stockman. I don't know anything about her. I think she went to Harvard, she might have said. But she talks in the beginning kind of about her upbringing and where she comes from and how she approaches. So in the beginning she says, "My parents never worked in factories. They went to college on scholarships and loans and became tenured professors. I grew up a faculty brat in a college town in Michigan. Before I started researching this book, nearly every person I interacted with on a daily basis had a bachelor's degree. Yet only about a third of American adults have one." This passage really stuck out to me. For one, I appreciate the author's humility to acknowledge her own biases, and they do come out. Even though she does a really good job of acknowledging it, like, her biases definitely do come out throughout the book. The 3 individuals she chose to profile in the story, one is a woman, one's a black man, and one is a guy from a big labor union family. So you got the gender, you got the race card, and you got the labor card covered. So it's a very focuses, I would say, on like the core tenets of like leftist ideology. So she definitely covers that. But I appreciated her calling this out because it shows that she's at least a little bit self-aware of what's happening. So this author is writing, the book is about 3 people in Indiana who lost their jobs because of essentially deindustrialization. So jobs being outsourced, shipped overseas, sent to Mexico, and the plant closures that follows. And it talks, I mean, obviously there's the economic piece to it, but there's also a cultural and a personal piece to it. So for a lot of these people, like, these are their lives. This is their this is a core part of their identity. Like, my father's about to retire this year. He's been working at the same factory since I was a kid, so 30 plus years. He's on a bowling league with guys he works with. I remember growing up, the company had work picnics, and they always had like catering and fun stuff for the kids. Like, I remember growing up and like my parents' jobs weren't just like things they did to earn a paycheck. Like, there was an inherent sense of community, and not like, obviously not all their employers were good. There's like mean people too, but like there's a guy who lives like 5 or 6 houses up the street from where I grew up, and he is part of management in my dad's company. So it really was like the kind of nostalgic, you know, the company management lives in the same neighborhood as the workers. And so there was always like a sense, like you were tied to these people, and there was a cultural tie that kind of brought you together. And so your job it's not just like a job, and that's what I think a lot of people don't understand, and why the loss of jobs to AI is going to be so problematic is, like, I don't think white collar folks realize how much their social network and their identities are wrapped up in their employment, their perception of their self-worth and their value. And blue collar folks who have lost their jobs, like they've already, like, they've seen what it's like to be told, like, you're not good enough anymore and we're getting rid of you, and not having anywhere else to go in the economy, right? Because our economy was built around knowledge work and people who have bachelor's degrees. And clearly I don't know what the exact numbers now, but only a third of American adults have a bachelor's degree. And so what this reveals is that we live in a socioeconomically segregated society. So when we talk about segregation, we talk about it usually from a racial lens, right? Or whenever we're talking about problems today, cultural problems, things always come from a gender. So gender is a big issue right now. Like your immigration status is a big issue. And then obviously race is still a big issue. Well, if culture is downstream of politics and politics is downstream of economics, right? Those issues emanated from somewhere. And I think they come from socioeconomics and economic status. And I don't think we're culturally aware of the source of those problems because we're quite literally segregated from each other. So we're not exposed to the other person. She says, I interacted with on a daily basis, every person I interacted with on a daily basis had a bachelor's degree. So what this reveals is we live in a socioeconomic caste-based society where you only know the world through the lens of the people that you interact with. So if you only interact with people who have bachelor's degrees, like that's the world you know. If you only interact with other people you work with at your factory and you live in a trailer and you're quote unquote white trash, like that's your view of the world. And so why I think this is interesting is because I've straddled both. So like I grew up in a working class household where certain things were normalized for me, and I left that and I went to college. I got a job in Washington, D.C. Like I entered the cultural elite, if you will. And I never fit in. I went from shopping at Save-A-Lot with my mom as a kid. If you don't know what Save-A-Lot is, it's like a discount grocery store with like cheap but highly processed foods. So I grew up going to Save-A-Lot as a kid to when I lived in DC shopping at Whole Foods every day, right? And so I have a foot in the door on each side. So I understand this perspective. I understand how you can insulate yourself and only see the world through the lens of people who all have bachelor's degrees and probably advanced degrees too at this point, right? But I also like know where I'm from. And this really didn't become aware to me until Trump got elected. It's interesting because this book starts with election night and Trump getting elected. But I think people think, especially like the cultural elite, these bachelor degree holders, the professional class, thinks that Trump came out of nowhere, that everyone who voted for him was a racist bigot. And I think they think that because they did not experience blue-collar suffering up until that point. Like they had never worked in a factory, never worked in a coal mine, have no idea, like are completely removed from that, have no idea what that's like. And I remember, I remember this in high school, and I think this is where like my perspective started shifting, or at least like my denial of my upbringing started shifting, because I got lucky. I had the good fortune of once I hit middle school and all of the different schools in my district were integrated, and then I got into high school, I fell into a crowd of doctors' kids, lawyers' kids, and engineers' kids. And I grew up next to a Fortune 500 company. if you've ever heard of it, Corning Incorporated. They do like Corelware. I think they've done Pyrex, but like your phone, the glass on the screen on your phone, Gorilla Glass was made at Corning. So they have big contracts with Apple and that kind of stuff. But I share that because there's a town that straddles where Corning is headquartered and my hometown. And that town is where a lot of the executives and like high level folks, not even high level, I mean, there's some executives, but like some high level folks lived, and they went to my school district. So I was able to interact with people who weren't working class, whose parents did have college degrees, who were executives. So I was experienced to a different culture. And that made it possible for me to go to college. Honestly, like neither of my parents at the time had college degrees. My mom has since gone back to school, but I didn't know how to go to college. So I was in AP classes. I took so many AP classes. I took classes under the table in high school. I just like borrowed textbooks and sat for the exams and like got college credit doing that. But like I was in all these AP classes and honors classes, and I was a really good student. Like I didn't have a role model to tell me how to get to college. Like I had no idea how to do it. I didn't know how to like sit for the SAT. I didn't know which schools to apply to. I mean, I applied to Duke, not because I actually wanted to go to Duke, but because my youth pastor liked the Duke basketball team. So I thought it'd be cool to go to Duke. Like I had no idea what I was doing. But I started rejecting my working class roots when I was kind of and it wasn't consciously rejecting it. It was just like I was mimicking what everyone else was doing around me. But all the kids I grew up with in high school, well, they put academics first, and some of them were on sports, but none of them worked part-time jobs. None of them worked a part-time job. They all studied. We were in band. We did music. And so I thought working was bad because it would interfere with academics. So instead of having a normal like part-time job as a 16, 17-year-old should, I was very entrepreneurial. I bought the bulk candy bars from Sam's Club and sold those in between class periods for $1 a bar. And that's how I paid for my gas for my car. But I early on developed this resentment and hatred for working class. Like I wanted to be accepted and liked by the group of people I was associated with in high school. And at the time I didn't know I wasn't one of them. I just, thought we were all kind of the same. But I kind of followed their lead. And so even, in college, right, like I could have easily waitressed, for example, and made more money and cut a lot of my debt that I ended up taking on. Again, I didn't do that because I thought it was beneath me. I thought I needed to build my resume and get relevant work experience and that kind of stuff. And that followed me into my professional career in DC. I remember I was still interning at the time, but the director of one of the think tanks I was interning at, my internship was coming to an end. I had been working at Starbucks to like pay my bills because they gave like a stipend, but it wasn't really it's like a couple $100 a month. So it didn't really cover anything. So she had asked me how much would it cost? How much would they need to pay me per month for me to leave Starbucks? And I don't know how we came to the conclusion that $2,000 was the right answer. Again, like I didn't know anything at the time. That's not enough to live in DC, by the way. But I accepted that and I took that and I quit Starbucks. And financially, I should have stayed at Starbucks. Like I should have been working as hard as I could to create a financial foundation for myself. But again, like I was playing this game where I wanted to be socially and culturally accepted within a group of people. And by her asking me that question, she implied that it was beneath me to work at Starbucks. So it was almost like a scarlet letter on my professional aura or my professional persona. Like if I continued doing that kind of work. And so I had always like carried that with me, and it got me into trouble. Like I regret that mindset. I wish I could go back and change it and have worked differently, but like that's kind of how it happened. So in the effort to leave my working class roots, I like tried to adopt the roots of the more professional, established cultural elite. But obviously, I didn't have the financial backing that all these people, later on, I would figure this out over time, but like, all these people were getting, mom and dad were paying for them. They had mom and dad's credit card. Like, they had another source of, whether it was income or not, they had financial backing that I just didn't have. And I should have never traded a job that paid for a job that didn't, or at least a job that barely paid. So I learned that lesson the hard way. But I didn't become fully conscious of my socioeconomic class until, I want to say it was like 2018. So at that point, I was like full in on, anti-Trumpism, deep down like the feminist rabbit hole, like kind of your stereotypical liberal, right? And so I had joined a women's only co-working / social club in DC at the time. And I just, love co-working spaces, wanted to be part of a women's only group, was very much into like, girl power kind of stuff. And I remember I left the club shortly after this. I want to say it was in November. Because at this point I had left my full-time job and I was trying to run my business full-time. Yeah, that's a story for another day. But I was at the club that day, and they had locations across the country, and there was an incident at the location in Hollywood, California, with racism and some issues with how some of the members were treating some of the workers, and it had fallen on class or racial lines, so it was presumed to be racism. And I remember those of us who were at there, like, I don't know if it was a spontaneous meeting, some meeting emerged, and we all like convened in one of the central areas of the space. And I remember a black woman got up and told all of us white sisters to shut up and give space so that they could like air their grievances. And at the time, like I said, I had left my job. I was running my business full time, so I wasn't making any money. I was hustling, like hardcore hustling. So I was like flipping stuff on eBay, and then I was secretly renting out my apartment in DC, the apartment I lived in. I was secretly renting it out on Airbnb. And so when I didn't have access to my apartment, the space had a shower, and so I was showering there. And I mean, quasi homelessy kind of like stuff. And I remember in that moment, like all of the people in the space were like financially well off. Like it cost money to be a member of the space. So these people weren't like, these weren't women working at Shake Shack or Taco Bell or Starbucks for that matter. These were highly educated women. They were professional women. They were probably, graduates of schools like Howard, Spelman, or just George Washington, like not necessarily a historically black college or university, anywhere, right? But they were professional elites, right? And during that meeting, in that moment, when a bunch of well-off, educated black women told me to shut up because I was white, that's when like the class stuff started really hitting home for me, because I was sitting there like, you have more money than I do. You are financially more secure. You are well put together. Like, I'm on the cusp of homelessness right now. I have more in common with the people working in this space than I do with the other members. And that's why, like, I tried to read after, like, the Black Lives Matter stuff. I tried to read Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, and so, like, there is, if you remember, like, during that summer, there was, like, the whole Black Square thing on Instagram, and then, like, people were rushing to, like, educate themselves about race issues in the United States because, like, clearly us white people were the problem. And I, like, got a few pages into the book, and I just had to close it because it was abundantly clear to me that this man, Ibram X. Kendi, I think is the guy who wrote it, just clearly lived a very different life than I lived. And I wasn't white trash. Like, I didn't grow up in a trailer park or anything. But I know people who did. Like, I know people who fit that stereotype. Not even a quarter mile down the road, there was a trailer park and a crappy bar and where people went. And so I was exposed to it. I was exposed to things like that, even though I kind of didn't fall into that, but I very easily could have, right? And so looking back, I'm very cognizant that I got lucky, because I know, like, when I graduated from high school, I remember we did like the like dress rehearsal, and like I'm in the beginning of the alphabet, and so I remember like there was a guy at the very start, and none of us knew who he was. Most of us had gone to like school together our whole lives, right? And they called this guy's name, and none of us knew who he was. And I turned to someone next to me, like, who is that? And they're like, oh, he just got out of jail, right? So like I grew up with people like that. But if you are like this woman who, I don't know where she went to high school, but I'm presuming probably a private school or some sort of like college prep school. But if you grew up in a culture where your parents are professors and you're only surrounded by people who have bachelor's degrees or, masters and JDs and PhDs, like, you're not exposed to the sufferings of the world and how white people can be just as negatively affected by socioeconomic problems as Black people. Like, it's going to look different, right? Like, people in inner city Baltimore are going to have different problems than, someone in a holler in Appalachia. But that doesn't mean the person in Appalachia has privilege or is like better off. And so that was when like in 2018 was when I started really picking up on this, because I did not take kindly to being told that I have privilege. And I do have some privilege, right? Like, I grew up in a household with two parents who are still married. They're celebrating their 37th anniversary. Neither of my parents drink, so there was no alcohol. There were no drugs. I grew up going to church 3 days a week. 2 days a week. Wednesdays, Sundays, whatever. I went to church regularly, right? So I was very involved in the church community. My mom encouraged us to get good grades, and so, did a lot of that. Spent a lot of time playing as a kid and reading and socializing with other kids. And so I recognize I have privilege in so much that I didn't have to deal with divorce. My mom's boyfriend number 10 was never like sneaking into my room at night. Like, we had hardship. I don't know how my parents both worked a full-time job and part-time jobs when me and my brothers were growing up. But they still made things work. And like, I remember there was times where things were hard, but we were never on like food stamps or, going to food banks or anything like that. Like that. I was never fearful that the house would be taken, the lights would be turned off, or like I'd go hungry. Like that, I never experienced that. So on the one hand, yes, I am privileged in that regard. But, when the 2008 financial crisis hit and my dad's work, like, demand slowed down and jobs were being outsourced to Asia and stuff like that, like, he was furloughed for periods of time. And so he would have to find like alternative work. He would go, do some work with my uncle from time to time. But I do remember that. I remember, the plant just like closing at whim. I know people in just friends growing up, like they left town and moved to different areas because their parents lost jobs. So I was also exposed to the precariousness of jobs, and how like a plant closure can really affect you. And my dad tells me stories all the time of what it was like growing up in, the 60s and 70s during the boom. And then I look at where that area of upstate New York is today, and it's a shadow of its former self. And it's really sad because it's a really beautiful area. It just doesn't have an economy. But I was reading something a while ago, but my hometown is technically still in a recession from 2008. So like these places, these parts of the country that were affected by deindustrialization, like they never got out of the 2008 recession. Like the financial crisis hit hard. And that gets back to this, right? So people are like, well, how did Trump get elected? How did we get here? Why is everyone so angry? And it gets to this, how people are just so disconnected from what's happening. And when I say people are disconnected, the people who are in charge of making decisions, the people who are supposedly giving voice to the rest of the country, and these aren't just politicians, these are people journalists, people working in the media, people working at think tanks, people writing on behalf of other people. Like there's someone right now sitting at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., writing about deindustrialization and has never lived through it. They come from, like this woman, a family of educated professional people. They've been surrounded by people with bachelor's degrees their whole life. The conversations they have are very different than the conversations people who are affected by job losses have, and especially blue-collar folks. And so they're writing about people of whom they've never even interacted with. Like, I would love to meet all the people in D.C. who have been to rural West Virginia. Like, it's not that far. You can easily get a car and go drive and experience it for yourself. And none of them have done it. So there's a really interesting chapter in this book called Hillbilly in a Pantsuit, and it talks about, it lends voice to like how Trump got elected and what happened. And it's interesting. She writes here, she talks about how as she was interviewing folks for this, like she would take them out to dinner and they would have conversations over dinner, right? And she was a bit dismayed because there was this like, there's a place in, I don't know if it's still there, but in where she was in Indiana, I think she's in Indianapolis. But there's a place called Bluebeard. And it brings back memories of when I lived in DC and all the restaurants on like 14th Street, and they're like the small plate, like you spend hundreds of dollars and you leave hungry, but it's like the fashionable and cool thing to do. Like the way she describes this restaurant in here, like she wanted to take one of the women she interviewed in this book, she wanted to take her there, but she didn't want to go there. What she picked was Cracker Barrel. And this gets to the cultural piece. So, right, your economics leads to your politics leads to your culture, right? So, like, even I grew up, like, for me, I grew up going to, like, Olive Garden and TGI Fridays. And even today, there are restaurants I won't take my parents to, not because they won't like it, but because it's so different from what they're used to. Like, they're going to expect, like, a large portion, and my dad's going to want, like, steak and fries. And if you've ever been to, like, a small plate, nice 1 Michelin star or James Beard award-winning restaurant, like that's not what they serve. And so she writes here, Cracker Barrel had come to symbolize the divide in the country after a political analyst pointed out that Barack Obama had won only 29% of counties with a Cracker Barrel, but 77% of counties with a Whole Foods. I lived on the Whole Foods side of the divide. I can walk to 4 different Whole Foods from my house, but I'd have to drive an hour to get to a Cracker Barrel. And this is what I'm talking about when I say socioeconomic segregation. It's not even just like, okay, you're a writer at the Brookings Institution, you have a college degree, you're talking about, blue collar work and you've never worked in a factory. It's that you socially outside of work aren't even participating in the same culture as these people, right? You're not going to the same restaurants. You don't know how they live. And so this creates a segregated society. Like it literally does, because the social institutions that you understand and you normalize are very different. So let me give you an example. So people in DC, I was obviously a member of a women's only club. So people in DC, people in bigger cities, their status comes from membership to these clubs. So there's people who are memberships of golf clubs and country clubs and all sorts of, I think there's in Alexandria, Virginia, there's like a really famous like boat yacht club thing where people spend like tens of thousands of dollars on memberships to these clubs. Everyone wants to be a club. And even in my hometown, this was also the case where the elites of town, so like the doctors and the lawyers, the bankers, there were like secret separate clubs that they were members of that I didn't know existed until literally like 2 or 3 years ago. I had no idea because I grew up going to Cracker Barrel and all those chain restaurants you see on the highway, on the side of a highway. But they go to these, like they segregate themselves by joining all these clubs and being members of these clubs. Whereas blue collar folks are also members of clubs, but they're different types of clubs. They're Freemasons. They're members of the Moose Lodge or the American Legion. And I grew up going to pancake breakfast at the Moose for the Boy Scouts, a troop that my brothers were part of, right? Like very fond memories of doing that. Spaghetti dinners. If someone in the community had like an illness or something or some fundraiser, they would always have like spaghetti dinner, right? Like this is what I'm talking about. Like blue collar people, like have spaghetti dinners to raise money, whereas like upper class professional elites go to like private clubs they're members of, or like fancy restaurants, and they like negotiate deals for like businesses. Like, it's just a completely different way of going about life. It's just totally divorced from one another. So if you don't interact with these people, like if you only shop at Whole Foods, and the not quite poor but also not quite well off people are shopping at Harris Teeter or Kroger, like, you don't understand what foods they eat. You don't understand the things they value. And this plays into politics, or not politics, but like the economics and the decisions that are made. So you can't so okay, let's say there's a food production plant, right? Like, say you go to Whole Foods, right, and you enjoy the end product. You enjoy like picking up your organic, free range chicken tenders, right, from the frozen aisle. You have no idea how they're made, and you don't know the people working in the jobs that make those. And maybe it's illegal immigrants. I don't know. Maybe it's people who like actually genuinely enjoy their jobs and take pride in it, and it's a way for them to provide their families. Well, if you only ever experience the end product that you're consuming, and you're never part of the input process, you don't understand the hardship and the problems that happen when the people on the input side of things lose their job, right? You only care about the brand and the product you're eating. You don't care how it got there. And so this is where the disconnect, I think, really, really comes from. And so in the next couple pages, she says, as the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu pointed out years ago, class isn't just about what kind of job you do or how much money you make. It's about taste, culture, and lifestyle. And so she goes through here, and she talks about things, and then she writes in parentheses, the differences. So she talks about like simple things like, so here, like, they smoked or chewed from a form of tobacco. No one in my social circle did. They were both proud gun owners. Two of the men who are referenced here. And she says, I didn't know a single person in Cambridge who owned a gun that shot anything but glue. And so these people on the left, I would say like cultural progressives, are advocating for policies and advocating for things that they just have no context of because they've never lived it. Like, who is anyone who has never like shot a gun to create legislation banning guns? It's just like things like that. Another thing she says, they lived within miles of Indianapolis, the city where they were born, and saw their siblings, their adult children, and their parents regularly. I lived far from where I grew up and saw my parents and my sister only a few times a year. So even like culture is different because the community is different. I recently commented on Substack about this, where women, especially again these like professional urban feminist women, complain about how hard it is to raise children, how expensive it is, how they don't have, it takes a village, but they don't have a village. And I've observed this firsthand because my best friend stayed at home, got married to someone who was a couple years older than us from the same high school. She still lives and she has a good job, but they live close by to family, and biologic and not biologic family. Like, my mother loves going and hanging out with her daughter. But I share that because my best friend didn't leave. I left the village. I went to DC. I now live in Texas. Like, I left my village, right? My best friend didn't. She stayed home. She's still with the village. And so she doesn't have problems. If her and her husband want to go out and go do something, she has 3 or 4 different people she can pick up the phone, call, and in a moment's notice they'll be there and they'll watch her daughter. They'll take care of her, right? Whereas upper class people who are complaining about the cost of childcare and how difficult it is for working moms, they only see it from their perspective because they left their tribes. They have to pay for childcare because they don't have a tribe near them. And even what I was saying before with like your job is more than how you make money. It's also like your community. Like, most white collar jobs, I'm gonna be honest, like, there's no community there. I think there's like one person I might talk to still from my time in DC. Otherwise, it's all built on superficial relationships. It's all about how you can help one person get to their next level in their career. It's very transactional. Like the moment something happens, like your coworker isn't going to be there. Your coworker is not going to be by your bedside when you get a cancer diagnosis. They're not going to be at your funeral. Okay, they might be at your wedding, but they're not going to be at your funeral. Your family is. Your family is, and so we left our families. We left our families. We left our tribe. And I find it really interesting that she highlighted this here because this is a key cultural sticking point for a lot of, especially women on the left, how things are so hard for women. And it's not. We've decided to make things hard for ourselves by leaving our families, by pursuing worthless college degrees, by taking jobs that don't pay us any money. And so I thought it was interesting that she called this out in this book because it really is a testament to the fact, if you look at like the Whole Foods Cracker Barrel divide, that's such a great illustration. But we are we are segregated. We are socioeconomically segregated. And because of our segregation, we are politically divided and our cultural values have changed. So they're now so irreconcilable. Like we don't even live in the same country anymore. And the note I want to wrap up this with is that the problem with all of this is that it's deliberate and by design. So poor people aren't supposed to climb the ladder. There is no ladder for poor people to climb. Social mobility is really a myth. Like it exists in so much as like me, the daughter of a factory worker, can go to college and get like the equivalent of a working class white collar job. But like I was never going to be like the next Secretary of State. I remember in college, I ran around telling people I was going to be Secretary of State, right? I was never going to be that, right? I started a business, but I was never going to build an Amazon. I am never going to be like Elon Musk. And all the, internet gurus will tell you, oh no, you need to believe in yourself. Like, yeah, okay, believe in yourself, but also recognize reality for what it is. Things are designed in such a way where we're not meant to succeed in the ways we think we are. And a lot of this has to do with the tribalism that's inherent within this cultural and socioeconomic divide. Like we're segregated socioeconomically. We don't exist in the same culture, in the same political milieu. And that is by design because the people who are within the upper echelons of society are trying to protect themselves and protect their own. So I want to close by reading an excerpt from David Graeber's Bullshit Jobs. I highly recommend reading this book. I wish I had read this when I was in my early stages of my career. It would have saved me a lot of heartache. But he talks in the book about how jobs are bullshit and why they're designed the way they are. And there is an element of design to it. Like a lot of people are working dumb, stupid jobs for a reason. But he talks about why it's hard to get the jobs we think we should have, and why things are so difficult. And he breaks it down into the cultural and the conservative and liberal. But he writes, conservative voters, I would suggest, tend to resent intellectuals more than they resent rich people because they can imagine a scenario in which they or their children might become rich, but cannot possibly imagine one in which they could ever become a member of the cultural elite. So that's the Whole Foods crowd. The I talked before about in American Made, the folks who go to Whole Foods, right? The folks who do all like the fancy things. That's who he's talking about here. If you think about it, that's not an unreasonable assessment. A truck driver's daughter from Nebraska might not have very much chance of becoming a millionaire. America now has the lowest social mobility in the developed world, but it could happen. So even though it's not that high of a chance, it could happen. There's virtually no way that same daughter will ever become an international human rights lawyer or drama critic for the New York Times. Even if she could get into the right schools, there would certainly be no possible way for her to then go on to live in New York or San Francisco for the requisite years of unpaid internships. Even if the son of Glazier got a toehold in a well-positioned bullshit job, he would likely, like Eric, a guy referenced earlier in the book, be unable or unwilling to transform it into a platform for the obligatory networking. There are a thousand invisible barriers. And so he brings this the attention to this too with Hollywood, right? Like, I could be the best actor in the world. I will never be a movie star in Hollywood, not for lack of trying. Like, even if I went out there and tried, I'm not. But like, even if I went out there and tried, like there are that millions of people, I'm sure, who go out there every year trying to strike it rich in Hollywood, and they never are. Because of who they are, who they come from, right? Like Haley Baldwin, Haley Bieber, she's Bieber now. Haley Bieber just was in the news for selling her makeup brand for like $1 billion whatever dollars to Elf, I think. I don't know. She sold a makeup brand, right? Okay, well, Haley Bieber didn't become like this beauty mogul and this entrepreneur because she's like smart and intelligent. I'm sure she is, but it's because her last name is Baldwin. Her maiden name was Baldwin. She's obviously Justin Bieber's wife now. But she was like born into the upper crust of society in Hollywood. So of course she's going to be successful. It's like the Jenner girls. Like a couple years ago, they were listed, one of them was listed on like the self-made billionaire list, and people got all upset because they're not self-made billionaires. They were born into the Kardashian clan, and the Kardashians like were, elites within, Hollywood before, they got their show and did all their things. So it really goes to show, like, it's not even so much that we're different. It's that, like, I will never be one of the people I tried to be in DC. I was never going to be accepted culturally, socially. Like, there were barriers to entry. Some of those were people looking down on me because I worked at Starbucks. There are all these barriers to entry that people don't appreciate and aren't aware of. And so this is how we've gotten to this political divide. And it baffles me that Democrats need to like spend millions of dollars to study this, because it's obvious to anyone. Like, if you just talk to people and listen, like it's obvious. But like, you can't pass laws for the Cracker Barrel crowd if you've never dined at Cracker Barrel and talked to those people. You don't understand what's happening. And so that's why people are really upset right now, especially with illegal immigration and why that's become such an issue. Like they talk about it in the book. Part of the process of one of the plant closures was these guys who've been working for decades building this specific, I think it's a bearing. I don't know what that is, but they manufacture this piece, and there's a lot of skill involved and heat treat and all that kind of stuff. But they were asked to train their Mexican replacements. Like, they literally imported people from Mexico that they could pay less to do the same work so that they could be more competitive. And this is happening. This is what people, so this is why people are upset, because if you lived your entire life, right, these people don't leave their homes, they grow up around their family, live around their family. If you have lived your entire life and you're the second, third generation working in a factory, your family's union, whatever, you're in, Indiana, quote unquote, white trash, right? You're just trying to get by. You got screwed over by the 2008 financial crisis. You lost everything. And then over the years, plants have been closing, jobs have been harder to find, wages have been going down. There's been trade-offs, right? So you've had to give up pensions and all this kind of stuff just so you could keep your job. And now your job's going to a migrant or an immigrant. Maybe they're legal, maybe they're not, I don't know. But the optics of it is, okay, there's some foreigner who's taking your job just because they're cheaper. You're being deprived not just of your livelihood and the ability to support yourself, but your dignity. You want to work. These people want to work. I think that's the gross assumption that folks on the left make, that these people don't want to work, that they just have like this disdain for work. No, like my dad didn't just show up to work at a factory. He worked in heat treat. He didn't just show up there. And okay, because like you're probably watching this, you have no idea. Like, heat treat's like grimy. Like, he would come home like in every, after his shifts and shower and stuff. Like, you get gross. It's not like glamorous work at all. And so for someone to show up there day in and day out, never miss a day, like rarely call in sick, to show up to a job and do the same thing over and over and over and over again for 30 years, like, why do people do that? Like, that's what folks on the left aren't asking. Like, why would someone do that? Okay? And the answer to that question is because it's a source of dignity. It's a means for them to provide for their families. Like my dad finds fulfillment in supporting his family. My mom works too, but he enjoys what he does. It's a job. He doesn't dislike it, and it allows him to like provide for his family. Okay, it's very simple, very very simple, and it also affords him the ability to go to Cracker Barrel on the weekends if he wants to, or a local diner or whatever. But that's what we're talking about here. So when you have people who have come into the country, first, they were legal migrants, right? Who came into the country and took your job, took your dignity, took your ability to take care of your family. And now we've had, over the last few years, an influx of illegal migrants, so people who aren't even taking jobs. They're like working, I've written about this, they're working in illicit jobs, like they're borrowing and stealing social security numbers so they can get jobs because they're not here legally. They're engaged in criminal activity. They're just not good. It's not good. But now, like, you're watching, the government and the, cultural elite support the rights of people who have come into the country illegally, and like, you're over here, you can barely qualify for whatever like assistance you need. Like you're bottom of the barrel. You're born and raised here, bottom of the barrel, third generation plant worker in like Indiana. You get nothing, and you're watching all these people get everything. Like I understand why people are upset, and the fact that there's an entire, like, I think it's a minority, honestly. Like I think 66% of people oppose illegal immigration, so it's a small minority of people within cities who are like this woman, who were raised by parents who have bachelor's degrees and shop at Whole Foods and live far away from home. Like, they just don't understand. They have no frame of reference or context. And so they're out protesting for the rights of immigrants, and they have no idea who the MAGA people are. They think like MAGA people are a bunch of like, a basket of deplorables, as Hillary Clinton called them. And that's not at all. Like, they've completely missed the boat. So I think this is a really interesting read. I'm like halfway through it, so I still have some work to go on it. I would highly recommend reading it. I think it's a really interesting take of what happens to what's happened to blue collar folks. It illustrates the socioeconomic divide. And it talks about socioeconomic segregation from the perspective of a writer who is part of the professional cultural elite, and how she writes about the blue-collar class who have been forgotten, and working class people who are seen as less than in our society. And that truly is how they are, because I did it. I like turned my back on essentially my own people and was like, I don't want to be you. I don't want anything to do with you. I resented my family for a long time too. And, thankfully I've grown out of that. But that's what's happening. That's what's happening is a lot of these anti-MAGA, like leftist ideologies have such a disdain for these people, for blue-collar workers. And as David Graeber talks about in the book, that excerpt I read, it's by design. Like, they want to protect their influence, their jobs, their culture. They don't want it to be tainted, right? They don't want it to be tainted. And this is the same thing that happened with racial segregation in the South. There was this purity mindset and like better than, and you didn't want black people drinking from the same water fountain as white people because it would like make it like dirty and impure, and the same thing is happening socioeconomically. We just don't see it because we don't talk about it, because it's easy to talk about things on gender lines and racial lines, much harder on socioeconomic lines, because it's not black and white. But these people really do. The Whole Foods crowd does not want the riffraff coming to their Whole Foods. If they did, Whole Foods would be built in communities where the riffraff exists, and they're not. And that's by design. So it's exclusionary by nature, and I think folks realize that. And working class people don't want, like, they don't want to go eat at your fancy restaurants. They don't want to live in your neighborhoods. They just want the dignity of a job that allows them to provide for their families, and they don't want to fall deeper into poverty. That's it. Like, it's that simple. So yeah, that's all I have for you. If you like this video, please subscribe. I'm trying to build up this channel, and share your thoughts and comments. I'd love to hear what other people think and if they've had similar experiences I did. Cool. Well, I'll see you in the next video.